Now, Latin in America, an ABC 10 News special.
San Diego is a multicultural mecca with people from hundreds of different countries, all sharing their culture, traditions, and stories. In honor of Hispanic Heritage Month, we're about to tell those stories for the next 30 minutes. But before we get there, we begin at the root. The one word connecting 3 million Americans right here in San Diego. Chicanos, Cubanos, Brasileiros, Boricuas, Guatemaltecos, Mexicanos, and so many more. This is Latin in America. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. And thank you to our panelists for being here and joining in our discussion. Our program tonight is titled Latin in America. So I want to begin by posing the question to each of you, how you would define being Latin in America today.
I think that people need to recognize that we are a very diverse group. And we stretch from color to color. And I think that that is something that's important that needs to be shared with everyone.
Jennifer?
For me, Latin America, it's more than just someone who crosses borders. So for me, that's what Latin America is.
Videla?
For me, being Latin in America, again, it means to acknowledge the fact that Latinos in America are very diverse. We come from so many different places and have so many different backgrounds, but there's still this sense of unity amongst us. And so for me, I'm Nicaraguan, and I've had grown up being proud to be Nicaraguan in my household, but outside in the public eye, I kind of quieted down on it for a while because I didn't necessarily see a lot of visibility. But as soon as I just started making my own space, I found community and Latinos from everywhere, and that really showed me how more unified we are than I thought, and then I think that is portrayed in how beautiful our differences can be and how much that can bring us together.
Well, for me, as someone who grew up within blocks from the U.S.-Mexico border and with family on both sides of the Chiapas-Guatemala border, I recognize that being Latin in America is really about a category that was used to lump so many of us, so many diverse peoples together. And it's for that reason, actually, that I reject even that term and I identify as Chicano. Not as an ethnic identity, but as a political identity that seeks to think about our longer, diverse history on this continent, and in particular, our indigenous history on this continent, that despite histories of colonization and Spanish language that does bind us together, that nevertheless, we do have some historic roots here.
And anybody else want to chime in right now?
Yeah, I think I'll chime in. I think, it's kind of complicated with me because there's many facets to me, right? There's the American part, there's my family's from Honduras, so there's that part. And third, and probably most important from an aesthetics view, I'm Black. So I get to see all sides of the coin when it comes to certain, disparities and, perception. And, it's funny because people can't put me in a box. My name is Luis Martinez, founder and CEO of We The Plug, and I am of Garifuna and Honduran descent. Most people think I'm African American, most people think, of that sort. My father, immigrated from Honduras when he was a teen, and he just grinded me, and, that's all I saw. And so I knew nothing but that. My mother also worked hard as well, and so I grew up in a home where, everything was hard work and, perseverance and survival, and that's kind of what I built, my mantra off of, so it keeps me grounded. There's been a lot of conversations about, being Afro-Latin in America in the last, I would say, 2 to 3 years, really since right before the pandemic, and it really ratcheted up during the pandemic with the awareness of Afro-Latins in America. When I first started We The Plug, we had our first meeting right at this table. It's a double entendre, so usually anything with tech, usually has a plug. And you know, for slang, we the plug is we're the connectors, so we're the builders, and we can't really rely on anyone else to, you know, tell us what our needs are. You know, we have to help each other out and succeed. There's plenty of Afro-Latins here in San Diego that are doing extraordinary things and are actually in the community putting in the work. Being Latin America is a privilege. I was fortunate enough to learn my history of being Garifuna descent, and we're only one of the few original African tribes that never endured slavery. And so knowing my history, knowing that, you know, our history, our language, our food and customs have been kept from all the centuries has been a blessing. And I think everyone has a unique experience of being Latin America. And, you know, mine is, you know, I'm not the only one that has the same issues. All I want to do is just bring a light to it and see where we can go to make our lives better in every way possible.
You brought up something interesting about perception and bias, and Jennifer, I kind of want to pose this question to you first, but how do you fight against that? I mean, because you have taken up the plight of, as you were saying, farm workers and a lot of our laborers. How do you try to dispel some of that bias that people have?
Honestly, I got a lot of that bias once I graduated college and I became a police officer, because people were like, a Mexican becoming law enforcement, like, for a lot of people, they're just very narrow-minded and they think like us law enforcement, we take our people out, but that's not the case. So that's where I had to like distinguish my culture and also like being Mexican, but also being born here in America. And it's like, I'm here serving my community, serving everyone, no matter what race you are, I'm gonna treat you with respect. And you know, people don't see that. And it really sucks when they just portray the negativity on law enforcement when there's so many positivity out there as well. I come from two Mexican parents who have crossed borders from Michoacán, Mexico. They are both migrant farm workers, and I myself was a migrant farm worker. My name is Jennifer Rocha. I graduated UC San Diego. I knew since I was in college that I wanted to take my pictures in the field because that's what got me there. They took myself and my two sisters to work in the fields in order for us to know what it is to work in hazardous conditions and for us to take a lesson from it and pursue a higher education. When those pictures went viral, I mean, it was a blessing because I'm like, wow, my parents are finally getting recognized. Their hard work is getting recognized. All these migrant farm workers are getting recognized because a lot of people just push them under a rug. I want to be able to bring a change and hey, the breaks need to be longer or we need to be providing more, paying them more. I am a police officer at San Diego State Police Department. You bring a different type of like perspective within the law enforcement community itself because they see the background you come from and they would have never expected that because a lot of people just see us as like, oh, they can reach anything because their parents are migrant farm workers or their parents work in low-wage jobs. We have to be the ones to write those stories in history. So I feel like hopefully through my graduation pictures, a message was sent so that people can get a feeling of like, hey, like, if she was able to do this coming from the background that she comes from, but yet she's proud of where she comes from, then why can't we keep it going, you know?
I think where we do see a lot of controversy, a lot of passion on both sides is surrounding the issue of immigration. There are so many topics that we could delve into with this, but just the topic of immigration reform and a comprehensive reform has been elusive, really, thus far. Where do you think, I mean, needs to be the first next step, and what would you like to see in terms of immigration reform?
I don't really feel like I have any sort of answer to like what immigration reform looks like in this country because it is just very clear as to kind of like who they prioritize. When the Ukrainians are still going through their war, it was very easy for the government to provide them aid. And it's just not the same for people south of the border, wherever they are. So I just don't necessarily know, and I'll just have to leave it at that.
I think I can kind of chime in on this actually, and it's about history. And I think people don't take into account the history of, and I'm going to speak specifically to Central America. This whole thing started with communism. And what happened was, you know, America was really trying to protect communism, well, trying to keep communism out of Latin America. And what happened was there was a lot of proxy wars in Nicaragua, in Honduras, and which led to folks like, you know, my family migrating to the States. And that became a trickle-down effect into now. And really, that's what is the root of the migrant crisis that we see today. And so once folks can understand the history of why things are the way they are, then they could trace that back. Now I think America's responsibility is to say, hey, you know what? I think we made a huge mistake at the time and we need to rectify that. And so now how to do that, I don't necessarily know. But I think understanding, you know, how we got here is important.
Part of the problem with even the conversation around comprehensive immigration reform is that we also think of it in very limited terms as a one-size-fits-all, and if we just get it right this one time, then that's it. But at the same time, there's no recognition that even just speaking in terms of the Latinx community, not even talking about African migrants, Caribbean migrants, and others, that even amongst our experiences, there are very diverse experiences. Not everyone's coming for the same reasons. There's differences between asylum seekers, refugee, migrants, multi-generational, even within our own families, mixed status families. Right, so until we understand the complexity of the diversity of experiences, you know, we're just going to keep hitting our head up against the wall.
My name is Roberto Hernandez. Although I was born in Mexico, I grew up from a very young age in San Isidro. Oftentimes I point to how the border itself had a very strong influence in my upbringing. I remember as a little kid, my mom was very involved with PTA, with the school board, and it got involved in some of those elections. And those PTA moms are no joke. I wanted to carry on in that similar vein of my mom and the lessons and teachings from her, always advocating for equitable education. Many of us that identify as Chicano, you know, we say we didn't cross the border crossed us. Because it was precisely that identification with the border community, growing up with Border Patrol, you know, stopping us, harassing us, that really raised the question of, you know, our own sense of belonging. I've been teaching at SDSU for going on 11 years. After having completed my doctorate and undergrad at UC Berkeley. Sometimes, you know, I say, you know, from the border to Berkeley and back again, because for me it's important to be able to come back to the area where I grew up, where I was most influenced. Part of how, you know, in the context of the Chicana and Chicano movement of the 1960s and 70s, and that reclamation of our indigenous roots, manifested itself through arts and culture. Even the art you see around me now, I mean, a lot of this imagery in many ways was forbidden or looked down upon. It's a practice, it's a way of life, right? So in continuing the work of promoting our arts and culture, it's really about highlighting that sense of belonging that goes back not to a recent immigrant experience, but centuries of presence here in these territories. The beauty of being able to provide a space such as this for the furthering of art and culture, not as adornment, but again as our living practice, and to really be able to see people enjoy and thrive themselves in that space. That to me is the most beautiful thing.
A big topic related to immigration right now is DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, and everybody's kind of waiting to see what the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals is going to do in terms of upholding that or striking it down. I don't know how closely all of you follow that, but how, I guess, detrimental would that be if that program is no longer in effect?
Well, as it is, right, it's important to note that DACA has only, in essence, been eligible for certain students, not all. So already we've seen a lot of young children deported or parents deported, and U.S.-born American citizen children making the decision to go back to the parents' home countries. Right? So there's already a lot of youth that is not even part of the conversation. And yet, to on top of that, have the possibility of DACA also being removed, it would just exacerbate what's already been an ongoing issue.
Yeah. Fidelia, you're 22, right? So you're young, and I would love to know what is kind of the conversation from. Do you have any friends, any acquaintances that would be affected by that?
Yeah, I have quite a few friends that would be affected by it, and honestly, it's scary to even just know that they are at risk of being deported at any time, any day. Especially knowing them closely, to knowing the lives they've established, the careers that they're getting into, just the future that they're setting up for themselves that they've worked really hard for, and they don't have the same chance that I have to an extent. I'm privileged, I'm not under DACA, I was born here, but that's not the same for people that I love, that's not the same for a lot of people here, and to know that to an extent they are uncomfortable in their home, as an empath, that really just makes me really sad. Recently I had an experience where I work also in Barrio Logan, and 2 big Border Patrol vans pulled up, which was unlike what I've seen there. I've seen officers pull up before to make stops, but nothing big like that. And immediately I just was scared. I was just scared. I knew my community, that community has a lot of residents who are undocumented, and I just realized that in there that something could change.
Jennifer, you're nodding a lot, and I'm sure you can probably identify with some of the things she's saying.
Yeah. Yeah, because going to UCSD, I had a lot of friends that were under DACA. So even then, they were always scared. They're like, it's something that could just easily be taken from us, and that's it, you know, all this hard work for nothing, you know. So like she said, I'm privileged to have been born here, but I can't imagine just to be waking up every day with that worry of, like, you know, it can be easily just taken away. So it just goes to show who's privileged in the sense of, like, who the government prioritizes more and doesn't take a step back and reflect how taking DACA away could affect all these individuals.
If I could add just one thing, I teach courses on the U.S.-Mexico border history, and oftentimes I say, you know, I have 3 different sets of students, some that are the current or aspiring border patrol or some kind of federal agency, others who, you know, either themselves or their family members are here without papers and who've lived a life having quite literally looking over their shoulder the whole time. And then a 3rd set of students that are US born and live in Tijuana because of rising costs, right? So it's a really weird assemblage of students to have in the same class, but increasingly as immigration has become such a hot button issue, you know, I have to give a disclaimer at the beginning and tell my students, like, if you're here without documents, I know if you want to share your story, like, you're welcome to, but at the same time, you know, I can't guarantee your safety because I don't know who else is in this room. I don't know if one of these other students of mine are going to turn around and turn over their own classmates, right? This is what we're dealing with even in the classrooms too.
This question is for all of you, and anybody can chime in when you think of something, but what work do you see being done in our San Diego County community right now that is really actively trying to break down those systematic barriers to try to change fundamentally the way things have been? Because I think over the last few years we see, you know, what's more high profile is the marches and the protests, but there are so many other ways that you can affect change. So what do you guys see being done in that regard?
I'll just say briefly that one thing we shouldn't lose sight of, though, is that protests tend to be outbursts once the more mainstream avenues are seen as closed. right? So they don't come out of a vacuum, and it's precisely because of decades of pushing against the grain, be it for better resources in the community, or not being food deserts, or entry into different professions, into the business sector. It's for those reasons that we've had the protests and outbursts that we do when we have those, and we need to not lose sight of that. But again, for me, it's as much as protest matters, like what do you do between one protest to the next, right? It's not like these occur again in a vacuum, but it's because people have been pushing, and once they feel they have no other means, then that's when we get these moments.
Small things that I've seen, well, big major things, but I always think that things can be done at a larger scale. I have recognized that places such as, like sacred spaces such as Chicano Park has now been recognized as a landmark in San Diego, and that is a huge accomplishment for the Chicano community. I do think though there should be more aid to that specific community. Now that it is recognized as a landmark, there is a lot of tourism that goes through there every day. I just think that maybe if we could, whatever is being made from that like the tourist industry in that regard could be given to that community and help them, build up their homes, establish better schools, better grocery stores, whatever they need, because they have been there for a long time. And then another thing that I have acknowledged too is in the History Center in Balboa Park, they do have an exhibit of Chicano Park. It's just Chicano Park. And that's just crazy to me to see in a museum, essentially, to see like photos of a place that I grew up going to in a museum, something that I could relate to completely and know exactly where this is. And I go there every day, it's pretty good. But again, I do think that there should be more aid to the community itself that these places are celebrating, but also maybe, they could be giving a little bit more. The position I was in just felt a lot like I had to assimilate to just the American society that I knew. The only time I experienced my own cultures were in my family homes, but when it came to the outside world, it just wasn't something that I could express as much. My name is Fidela Lisette. I am a queer Nicaraguan and Italian film photographer. Film allowed me to really get personal with my camera. I just found a love for that and a love for the tools that I've learned from that and using it to showcase my life and other people's lives and the culture that I used to dismiss a lot, but then with the camera I found just so much beauty in it. Chicanismo, as I was taught from my elders, is a state of heart and a state of mind, and it's about how we show up for our community now. Identifying as Chicana is unique in its own way, but it is not something that's new for someone like me. There are a lot of Central Americans and Filipinos and Black people in the Chicano community. Being a Latina in America, to me, is a prideful and strong woman, and we carry a lot on our shoulders. We carry a lot of the pain that our ancestors felt. We carry a lot of the pain that our present-day family has and feels. And at the end of the day, one of my biggest values is to just give back to my community. And I found a way to do that with my photography.
So many stories, so many perspectives. I wish we had more time, but unfortunately that is the end of our time together for tonight. Thank you all so much for being here. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us at home. We are ABC 10 News, and you can watch the rest of this or the entire special on 10news.com. Good night.
I'm proud to say where I'm come from. I'm not ashamed of it. And it's just a blessing. And we need to just soak it in and also just embrace both cultures.
If I could describe being Latin in America in one word, I would choose proud.
There's plenty of Afro-Latins here in San Diego that are doing extraordinary things and are actually in the community putting in the work. Being Latin America is a privilege.
As an educator, how do we maintain that sense of culture and community knowledge, community wealth, if not just through education, but also through the everyday practices, that everyday imagery we see around us?